Hello. So here's some feedback on the biggest obstacle paper, which is challenging because college, right? I mean, almost everything that you're going to write in college is the application of knowledge, right? So you're going to read a textbook and then you're going to write about it, or you're going to read a textbook, you're going to watch a video and then comment on the video based on what you read in the textbook. So in this paper, I'm asking you to apply all of the stuff that you have watched and read, not all of it, but pieces that fit. So maybe something from the propaganda model, right, is going to fit into your paper. Or maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of the 12 biases that you read are going to fit in the paper. Or maybe something about how race is determined by where you live, location, as opposed to who you actually are, right, from the "You Don't Look Mexican" article. So all of those things I want you to try to apply and look at your topic and say, hey, where does this come in? Because remember, you're not trying to persuade us of we should agree with you. You're supposed to look at what's the obstacle of people even listening to what you're going to say. And so I have a couple examples from some papers, right? Mary Pat, right, is writing about prostitution and sex trafficking. Right? And she says, prostitution is one form of sex trafficking that can be overlooked. We need to break away from our generalized thinking around prostitution. Many tend to believe that individuals involved in prostitution work for themselves and enjoy their work. Right? Well, hey, if they work for themselves and enjoy it, who are we, right, to look into anything, right? We can ignore the 16-year-olds being trafficked from St. Paul to Chicago or vice versa. So, and there's a piece where you can go and find some research that backs up that this isn't Pretty Woman crap, right? And how brutal and what really leads most women into prostitution, right? And so that goes against the idea that, hey, we say, they choose it, so who are we? So that could be something, a big part of the paper, right on track. To move over to Alexi's paper, which is talking about the over-sexualization of women in media, right? She brings in and specifically names the bias. You don't have to do that, and it totally works. We'll know what you're talking about. But she says, the ostrich bias is the bias that states that the opposing individuals have a tendency to avoid bad things. How many of you have been at dinner, said something, and then you have a relative who immediately changes the topic, right? Because they won't talk about it. That's ostrich, denying it. So, talks about denying it, then it moves into people calling these images, these over-sexualized images, empowering, right, or ignoring it. So there's a place too to go into more detail, right? Instead of a part of a paragraph, I would have a whole paragraph, maybe even a whole page about what goes into that denial of the problem, right? Read the biases again, watch the video. If you're having a hard time, when you go back to your paper, and remember, you're writing about what's the obstacle to people understanding or even listening to what you're doing. Because think about how many people, if you start talking about prostitution, just tune it out. Oh, women change that. Or if they look at sex in advertising, they just say, hey, it sells, nothing we can do about it, right? And that's the bias of success. I think I'm getting the name wrong, right? But if it works, what can you do, right? Which can also tie into capitalism, right? How much of this sexualization stuff do men ever be called on, right? How often, when there's a rape case, what's the first thing to ask, right? Is what was the woman wearing, right? As opposed to what the hell was the man doing, right? Have you ever seen a PSA, public service announcement, on TV that said, hey, real men don't pay for sex? Right, because we don't talk about that. Right? Over the next day or two, right, as you're reading your fellow students' papers in your group, think about, hey, maybe you missed this part. You can add that in, but really focus on the obstacles for people listening and what's going on. Now, you do everything else too, the cut, add, move that we talked about earlier. And one example that I want you to give you, this is from Mary Pat's paper. Mary Pat, you have a nice introduction. It's all right, it does its job. And then on page 4, there is a really interesting chapter that says, as Minnesotans, it's important to be more educated on the topic, right? 2018 is, I'm condensing, 2018 brings in the Super Bowl, right? That means there's going to be more women brought in too. When those things happen, just like conventions, right, more prostitutions are brought in. That could be a great introduction, because most of the people, I know, I think there's some person here who's out of state, but most of us are in Minnesota, so that could be a really good attention grabber, saying, hey, the Super Bowl's coming, everybody's thinking rah rah, and you say, well, guess what, sex trafficking follows the Super Bowl. So that could be a really good attention grabber for the beginning, right? First draft is 10 points. This draft is 10 points. The final draft, which we'll get to at the end of the semester, is 100 points. So it's okay to struggle. I expect you to have big changes, and some people are going to have a lot of big changes to make sure you focus on the obstacle. Keep working on it, right? Give good feedback. Do your best. This is due on Thursday, right? Yeah, you can do it, right? And think about, and this is why I picked this cheesy video thing. Context, the stuff around us, the propaganda around us. We're so used to it, we don't even think about it, right? I grew up in a small town. You know how crazy this background looks to me? And I can think, if I was in a small town, who the heck would want to live in a city? And I bet you there's a lot of city people who would think, why would I live in the country? It's too dang boring, right? That's because the bias of where we grew up. So in this paper, I'm asking you to think about what's the bias, what's the obstacle, what's the propaganda your reader has bought into that's going to make them think, hey, sex trafficking, who cares? Hey, environment, who cares? We can't do anything about it. Hey, sexual images, all those papers that you're writing. So keep it up, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with.